Today we are going to talk about learning in constructivist perspective. So we shall be exploring what constructivist perspective is, how learning can be distinguished as construction of knowledge and as transmission and reception of learning. So what is the difference between the learning as transmission of knowledge and learning as construction of knowledge? Now let us try to understand what constructivism is. If we try to understand constructivism, it's a theory according to which learner has to construct knowledge. So here the learner is not supposed to just passively take in information, and he is supposed to be engaged in the process of learning. This means that the concerned teacher should provide learner the opportunity to find out meaning by using participatory methods. So the skill of knowledge construction is often considered as critical thinking. So if we want to construct knowledge, so that has to be done through critical thinking. What are the basic assumptions of constructivism? Basic assumption of constructivism is that knowledge is actively constructed by the learner. So that means the learner here is not to take the information passively. He or she cannot be treated as a blank slate. So we shall be discussing it further, that how the learner here is different from the learner in case of where he is only supposed to receive and transmit information. Here the learner has to be more active. More activity is involved, and organization experience has to be patterned in such a manner that the learner engage himself, understand it, and fundamentally try to explore it. So here the individual cannot understand apart from their organic embeddedness in social and symbolic system. Here the individual has to be active, meaningful, and socially embossed in the organization in such a manner that one should be reflecting on ongoing development or flow of information. So flow of information is also going to be dynamic, and the individual would also be dynamic in thinking, analyzing, interpreting, and finally coming out with conclusions. So that is why we said initially that here the learner would be exploring through critical thinking. So critical thinking is going to be at the center as far as constructivism is concerned, as far as the student learning through constructivism is concerned. Now let us try to understand what kind of classroom would we have if the constructivists are at the center. So if we try to understand constructivist classroom, the classroom should have certain characteristics, like the students here would be autonomous, they would be taking initiative, they would be encouraged to speak, think in such a manner that the teacher would be asking a lot of open-ended questions and would also be waiting for them to respond. Here the teacher would be working more like a facilitator than the transmitter of information. Here the higher level thinking will be encouraged, and students will be engaged in dialogue with the teacher as well as with each other. Students here would be engaged in experiences which they will form hypotheses, they will challenge hypotheses, they will discuss hypotheses, they will analyze hypotheses, and after analyzing they will also try to construct certain theories on the basis of whatever analysis of the hypothesis they get. So this is the core concept and this is the basic idea as far as constructivism is concerned. Students try to construct meaning. How would they construct meaning? One, through interacting with material. How they are able to interact with the material, the way you are interacting with the material currently. here the television is the media through which you are interacting on this particular topic. Similarly, when you are interacting with each other, then again you are interacting and trying to construct meaning. Thirdly, constructivists also believe that the individual would be constructing the information based upon the fact that he or she is actively and independently learning on his own and would be discovering knowledge rather than remaining the passive listener in the classroom. So, as we understand that constructivism believes that the student has to construct meaning, and that can only be done through interaction with others, with material and by observation. There are many approaches which can be used as a constructivist approach. Some of them are concept mapping. Now, let us try to understand what concept mapping is. Concept mapping means that we provide certain concepts and the individual will have to map the concepts with each other. Then there is problem solving. That means we have given the facts to the students, we have given the theories to the students. Based upon those theories, certain problems are given to the students and student has to identify what is the problem and solve the problem based upon the information which has been given to him. So, here the student will be applying his mind as to understand it better as well as to come down to certain conclusion. Then there will be investigatory approach. What does investigatory approach means? That we have given certain problem and that has to be investigated. Naturally, investigatory approach brings us to the fact that how the projects are to be taken up or how the dissertations which the students generally do in their grads or PG, that is also the projects which are given to the students even of the 10th class or 11th class. So, there they have to take the investigation. There is a problem, based upon the problem they have to build a hypothesis, and usually those hypotheses are null hypothesis, and after having framed hypothesis, the person is supposed to investigate the prove that hypothesis by developing some tool, and after having developed certain tool, one has to apply it to the sample, and after having applied to the sample, the person has to analyze that whatever the statistics are available using the particular tool, and after analysis the people would come down to certain decisions or conclusions. So, this is what investigatory approach is. Now, let us talk about social inquiry approach. Social inquiry approach, as the word itself connotes, is that there is certain issue, and as to understand that social issue, the person has to conduct some kind of inquiry. So, that inquiry can be done based upon the discussions with the people of that particular social group or that particular community. For example, let us take an example of the social inquiry. Students have been given a project as to understand that in particular social area, in particular place, what kind of occupation people are in. So, that is going to be the social inquiry, and based upon that they also have to evaluate and analyze the socio-economic condition of those people. So, here the problem has been given to the people, and because they have the problem and it is a kind of a social inquiry, so accordingly they will have to meet people as to understand their requirements, they will have to meet people, question them and understand that how those needs can be fulfilled. So, these kind of approaches are the constructivist approach, and they help the people to think more, and the higher level of thinking is also involved. So, when we talk about skill of knowledge construction, this means that the critical thinking is involved. This also means that the kind of a teaching which is going to stay in the class would be activity driven, will be project driven, which will be involving more of students rather than teacher, and the students would be involved in such a manner that whatever information has been shared with them by the teacher or by other mechanism, may it be the book, may it be any other media, the students will be interpreting the information, the students would be analyzing the information, they would also be synthesizing or evaluating the information or ideas and accordingly interpreting meaning as to draw the inferences which will be beyond the literal meaning. For example, if the student has been given a description of certain historical period, and that historical period, based upon the understanding of that historical period, they have to infer that why those people behaved in certain manner. For example, there are polygamous civilizations, and that has to be understood by the students. So, they are given example of certain historical period, and accordingly they are informed that what kind of socio-economic situations were there. So, they can come down to understand that why people behaved in that manner, why certain norms were followed, why certain behavior patterns were followed. In fact, based upon these meanings, the students can also analyze and understand the parts of the whole and their relationship to each other. So, analysis, which means that identifying the parts of the whole, whole here means the complete data, the complete understanding, as well as they would also be understanding their relationship to each other. So, this is also one of the kind of a thinking which has to be initiated amongst the students, and students here would be investigating the local environmental factors. Let us give the problem to the students as to understand that in which weather that migrating birds come to Delhi and what affects their coming to Delhi, why their number have increased or reduced. So, if this problem has been given and they have to find out, that problem would be linked with the environmental factors. So, they will have to investigate local environmental factors and understand that what is the typical behavior of the migrating birds. So, these kind of thinking is called analysis. Here, the students will be identifying parts of the whole, like one part here is the migrating birds behavior and another is the environmental factor. So, environmental factor which exists as a whole, how that is having an impact on the migrating birds. Then the students would also be asked to synthesize, that means identify the relationship between two or more ideas. Synthesis usually means that they are to understand how those two ideas have been taken together. Like if we provide students to compare or contrast between certain aspects, usually whenever we provide the compare questions or contrast question, then we are asking the students to synthesize their information and try to understand the relationship between the two. Whenever we are comparing between two civilizations, then naturally we are synthesizing them on one platform. For example, if we try to understand, we want the students to answer the question that what was similar as far as Napoleon was concerned or Hitler was concerned. So, they will have to they understand the various socio-political perspective of their time, and accordingly they will have to bring a picture which would be a comparative picture as well as contrastive picture, which will show that why they behaved either in the similar manner at certain situation or in the different manner in certain situation. Next kind of understanding or the thinking which is induced amongst the students whenever we talk about the constructivism is evaluation. What does evaluation means? Evaluation means the person has been provided certain information and the person has to judge the quality, credibility and importance of certain ideas and events. So, here the students would be going through the historical events and determining which one is most credible. So, whenever we talk about evaluation, we have to understand that here the students will be thinking at a very higher level and student will be able to, for becoming an evaluator, the student would be good at analysis as well as capable of synthesizing information, and based upon that he or she is capable of judging the credibility and importance of data also and events also. Here the students would be reading certain historical events and determining that which one is most credible. Generally, whenever we talk about getting the information, we do tell our students that whenever you get the information, verify that information and evaluate that information. How would they evaluate? Of course, based upon their own understanding, they should be able to judge whether the information is credible, whether the data which they have gathered, it is reliable or not. So, they should be having this kind of thinking also developed. Now, let us try to understand that what kind of behavior teacher will be taking up if the teacher is initiating, addressing or motivating the students to take up critical thinking. One, teacher would be sharing information. Sharing information would mean that the teacher here would be providing certain observation to the students, she would be providing certain opinions also and clarifications also, and the problem would also be shared with the students. So, here the information would be shared, and after having shared, what kind of behavior the teacher would have? The teacher would be saying that students the teacher do understand that the students have certain pre-existing ideas, and based upon the observation which have been shared in the class, based upon the examples which have been shared in the class, they can come down to certain conceptions. So, here the teacher would be working as a facilitator by sharing information, and the student would be based upon his pre-existing ideas, utilizing that information and considering the present information depending upon what kind of thinking he or she has developed. So, accordingly the misconception or the conception will be formed, and this is usually done in the literature. Another kind of example which we can have as far as the critical thinking is concerned in the classroom is that of exploring dissonance. That means we have provided certain areas of disagreement, and after having provided certain areas of disagreement in the class, we encourage them for the ideas as to provide the counter ideas. So, here the teacher would be saying that whatever disagreement the students have, the learner has, she understands that, and she gives freedom to the students as to disagree with those ideas, and thereby the learning will be initiated, or learning would be marked. So, accordingly the classroom environment will be designed to assess the students as to provide the dissonance. So, here the students' dissonance would be explored, and by exploring dissonance, then naturally more critical thinking would be also invoked amongst the learners. So, this is a very positive learning experience, and this is how the teacher would also be taking up in the class, that this is a positive learning experience. Disagreeing with the facts shared or with the teacher is a positive learning behavior. By contradicting or by providing negative meaning, or by providing the knowledge which needs correction, the teacher would be again motivating the students by saying that the students are the expert and students have to correct the thing. So, when the students will be left to think as an expert, those proposals which have been given with certain negative comment or with the comment which is not as per the knowledge. So, naturally, so this will leads to students thinking more and as well as providing the facts. So, they would be again going back to whatever knowledge they have in their mind, as well as they would also be one, they would be exploring their own knowledge, and secondly, they would be trying to find out more knowledge on their own. So, it will be more of a understanding on their part and analysis on their part, evaluation, synthesis, all those critical thinking aspects would be involved. Another thing which the teacher can take up in the class is that the students can be asked to test or modify the proposed synthesis. So, they can provide certain facts to the students, and that they would be asked to cognitively think upon the data or facts, and accordingly they will have to testify that. So, this kind of a learning will make them research oriented, and naturally whenever an individual becomes research oriented, that means the person has become more of a critical thinker, because person is thinking in of various parameters as far as proposal synthesis is concerned. Another kind of a problem which can be initiated in the class is that of agreeing or applying a new kind of knowledge. That means the teacher here would be providing the summary of agreements and application of new knowledge. So, here that new kind of a knowledge will be provided, and based upon that the discussion will be initiated in the class, and based upon the learning material which has been provided, the students will be discussing, they will be questioning, they will be answering, they will be discussing amongst themselves, and thereby invoking the knowledge either by agreeing with each other, by applying the new knowledge. So, this kind of classroom activities would also lead to critical thinking. Friends, you must have noticed that whatever classroom activities we have discussed till now, all of them require the student to behave in an autonomous manner. All of them require the students to behave in a controlled manner. That means here the teacher will not be the controller. In fact, the teacher would be just the facilitator or be one of the group. So, here the knowledge will be shared, but the knowledge will not be transmitted. So, this is the difference between the receptive knowledge and the constructed knowledge, because here the knowledge is being shared. So, the student has to decide that how that knowledge has to be utilized, used. Either they have to analyze, synthesize, critically use that for the application based of certain models. For example, we have provided certain theorem, how that has to be applied, that can only be understood if the student do different kind of problem solving. So, in mathematics generally, whenever we talk about problem, that itself means that the student has to do critical thinking, and if the student has to do critical thinking, that itself means that the student is indulged in higher level of thinking. So, friends, we have to understand that whenever we talk about the constructivism, here the student would be synthesizing the information, the relationship between the information, and the student will also be evaluating the data and the quality, and accordingly coming down to certain decisions. Student will also be working as an investigator, because whenever the person is identifying the part of whole or the relationship to each other, that means the student will be working as investigator, and the student would also be given certain ideas, information and data, and there the students will be interpreting. That means drawing certain inferences beyond the literal meaning. So, friends, as we understand that whatever kind of approach we take, the approaches which we have discussed till now are that of concept mapping, problem solving, investigatory approach and social inquiry approach, and we discussed in some details which can be further taken up if we want to do so. And we have also dealt the kind of classroom activities which are to be taken up in the class as far as constructive approach is concerned. So, here you must have understood that what constructive approach is. We shall be dealing with the constructive approach further when we will be talking about that what does constructivism means for the student, how the learner has to be initiated into constructing one's knowledge. So, in the next lecture, I shall be further in the part 2 of the series of the lecture, I shall be further taking up this particular topic, which is constructivism. So, we shall be going further and digging up further as to understand that how learner has to construct one's own knowledge and one's own experience as to improve one's own learning, and how it has to be retrieved, and how the teachers have to teach these particular skills. Namaskar, Jai Hind. Thanks a lot for being with me.